Hey listeners, welcome back to another episode of It's the People, our interview series where we explore the inside story of building companies and investment portfolios with high-octane founders, limited partners, and fund managers. We hope these conversations push you to be even better at what you do. In this episode, my partner Andy Greenfield and I had the opportunity to interview Ram Parimi. Ram was a co-founder of a technology company in the event space called SocialTables that was acquired by Cvent, and he has since been a serial sales, revenue, and go-to-market leader at numerous technology companies, including Blend, Google Cloud, EventBrite, and now at the construction technology company Kojo. He has also been a key advisor to numerous early-stage technology companies. This interview was a classic example of It's the People, as we get to do a deep dive into what makes Ram tick and what has made him successful over time. We discussed a variety of things, including how his experience at a young age as a vocalist in Indian classical music led to his love for performing and, more importantly, getting in front of people to make an impact, which in a way has been his life's work. How to lead and manage effectively in our brave new world of remote, hybrid, and in-person. Tips on how to interview that lead to being a great assessor and recruiter of talent. His key insight that at the end of the day, relationships are the only thing we have, and much more. To start things off, Ron begins the conversation with his life story in 60 seconds.
Before we begin, we'd like to note that this interview is for informational purposes only, and that the opinions expressed should not be relied upon as a basis for investment decisions. TIA Ventures is a seed-stage fund focusing primarily on early-stage business-to-business technology companies, with an obsessive focus on end customers and early teams.
Ram would like to start this out the way that we typically start these out and challenge you. And I know it's there's a lot of chapters in this already, but could you give us the Ram Parimi life story in 60 seconds?
Yeah.
If you need it.
Yeah, absolutely. So, first of all, it's nice to be here, and thanks for inviting me. And I'll just start with, I think my story is kind of similar to a startup's life, which is what it started with and how it's going is very different than what I intended it to be. And I think that's what's actually fun about it. So I was born in India. I grew up in the Bay Area. I went to college at Colgate in Central New York, and from there, I actually pursued Indian classical vocal music. So I actually started as a failed recording artist, went into the field. And what's exciting is I finally figured out like what I loved about performing, which was that I actually like getting in front of people and being able to challenge them to think differently and have them come away with a better experience. And that's what was interesting is sales led to sales leadership. Sales leadership led to co-founding a business. And from there, it's been the last 8 years I've been refining those skills around sales leadership, go-to-market leadership, marketing leadership, and being a cross-functional partner to several departments across, scaled companies like Blend, which went public last July, a short stint at Google, which was actually, I think a lot of people have a lot of comments in the startup industry, but Google really taught me something so important, which is what does good look like? And even if that's what good looks like, there's still opportunities for improvement. And so nobody's perfect. The best company in the world I had more cobwebs than I ever thought to believe. And coming back to Blend in the last couple of years, I had the privilege of working for Tim Mayopoulos, who's the ex-president CEO of Fannie Mae, who taught me a lot about how to communicate at an executive level. And that's kind of where I'm at today, which is taking a startup that's in the construction space and tried to get it to a place where people see construction tech not as a nice to have in this industry and started making it a need to have. And every single thread along my journey, I know this is over 60 seconds, Wills, and you'll probably call me out on that, but every single thread across my journey, I think ties back to one thing and one thing only, which is, am I adding value in that to the people around me in anything I do? It's not just singing music because that's what my parents want me to do. Is it actually are people who are receiving my music getting something out of it? And I think that's what the common thread is across everything. So I've always been tied more to impact than dollars.
So, Ram, you pretty much kind of covered everything that I'm hoping to ask you questions about over the course of this interview here. So actually, we could probably just end it right now. But if we could just, and there's a lot I want to dig in on kind of your professional life and what you've done. But you talked about, being born in India. Can you take us back to like early life? And in particular, was there a key moment or key moments from your early life that really stand out and maybe, became some of the springboards for like who you are today?
Yeah. Yeah, I actually been thinking a lot about this because I have several people from several backgrounds in a remote working environment and trying to get to know their learning styles. And a lot of it actually starts as getting to know them as where they came from, how they grew up, because that's a pretty transformative part of how you learn and how you adapt to situations. I actually went to 4 different schools between kindergarten and 5th grade, and moved a couple cities. And I think a lot of my early childhood, whether it be India or just actually Queens, New York, after India, and then the Bay Area, was all predicated around the fact that we were a family that was trying to make it in the United States. My dad had a PhD electrical engineering from IIT Bombay. My mom was a master's in organic chemistry. Education wasn't the problem. It was, trying to sell yourself in a market that, generally ethnic people don't know how to do that very early on. And I watched that live, as a child. But even beyond that, I got to experience the fact that when you don't sell yourself, you're always on the, back-footed, and whether it be how you're receiving information rather than being directing, the trajectory of your life. But that being said, I think on the flip side of that is a grit that my parents had along the way to make this come to life. I think I've shared the reason why I joined Blend was because I deeply tied myself to the mortgage industry, which was my parents bought a house, had to put down 3%, only could afford 2%, and borrowed 1% the person that sold it to them. And that house has happened to be in Palo Alto, California, but it was life-changing for them to take that risk. That's a pretty gutsy risk, if you don't really have that much going on and liquid net worth. And so I think that's what I watched. I watched a family that was pretty talented, could use better sales skills, and at the end of the day, actually had so much grit, and that was what helped me get through a lot of the challenges in the last 10 years in sort of startup life. I was like, this can't be as hard as what it was for my parents. Like that's way harder.
Yeah.
And I think that having that kind of that check and balance is so helpful. The other thing I'll say too is, I don't know, ethnic families thrive in ambiguity because English is a second language. So when they communicate something to you, when your teacher says it versus when you say it, and when your parents say it, it's totally different. So learning how to operate in ambiguity became kind of a normal way of doing work. And that somehow, some way has been helpful. I never knew that at the time. It was kind of confusing oftentimes, like, what do you actually want me to do? But I realize now more and more that is a gift, that the ability to thrive in that ambiguity.
And that concept, there's so much that you just shared, but specifically wrote down this concept of when you don't sell yourself, you're always back-footed. Totally get that your family had that grit, that risk-taking kind of mentality. Did they also have that sell yourself mentality, or is that something that you've honed?
No, actually, they didn't. Like, my mom was a little bit better at it than my dad was, but in general, it was definitely something that took years for them to get mastered. And you got to think, from their perspective, it was a challenge to just be employed with being an H-1B visa, in the United States, or a green card. And so it wasn't really their mindset was, how do I protect and stay consistent protect the family and stay consistent in my career, to give their kids the opportunity to take risks. Right. And that's literally the mindset. Let us set the foundation so these next two can take risks. And that was very much a part of my mindset as I grew up. Is like, don't take the consistent path, the one that that might get you the consistent paycheck. Go take a risk, because that's what we're doing.
And so just one more question, Andy. I know you're chomping at the bit here. just going back to the beginning here, you talked about like performing, loving to get up in front of people, challenge them to come away with a different point of view. And I think back on, I've known you now for a long time. We went to Colgate together. I think we're closer now than we were when we were at school. But I started thinking back on you at Colgate, and you were just a fun, enjoyable person. But at the same time, if you look at the resume, you were student body president. You were at Colgate, where there's like a long tradition of a cappella, and you were in the most prestigious of the a cappella groups. You were part of a group of friends that started a business while you were there. And I guess I wrote down, like, you were a non-obvious extreme overachiever, but in a way that never felt like it was annoying or like, who is this guy? Like, was it not necessarily about the achievement so much as some other thing that was really driving you, even at those early kind of formative stages of early life, but getting into like being a real human and person and adult?
Yeah, I think that it goes back to that term, like I said earlier, which is impact. I want everybody to walk away from meeting me thinking like, wow, I got some value out of that conversation. And I've always thought about giving value first and then asking for something rather than the flip. And that's what I felt about Colgate, was that it was this tiny community. It wasn't that big, right? And we had a lot of challenges that felt really hard to solve. But if you just did it, if you just did something, you can make significant progress. Like, for example, I remember as student body president, I really wanted this welcome back week, which is, why do we need to have a party at spring party week and everyone's got all the momentum in the front of the school year? Like, why can't we throw a full week there? And learned it was just budget and logistics, and really it was effort. And that was solved fairly quickly. I think we had Mitch Hedberg come that year. And it was transformational for every student who was new to that campus that year to realize, hey, I'm walking into a really cool environment rather than I'm waiting for that 7 months later. And those little things, I think, taught me, just doing it kind of gave me the momentum to say, I could keep doing more. But the student body president thing was actually a result of being junior class president. And I was like, oh, I can win this junior class president job. That was fairly easy. Let's go do the harder thing here and actually make a real impact. And so that's kind of where I think where Colgate, and also Colgate was super welcoming to me. It was definitely a campus where you could just be yourself. I felt like, amongst all the noise, whether it be Greek noise or non-Greek or sports or et cetera, you just be yourself and you always find a niche and you can build off of that niche. And I really enjoyed that. There was several niches. I was kind of bored being in one, as you probably saw from my resume. But yeah, it was definitely a place that created an environment where someone like me can be, like to your words, hard to say as a human being, as on my side, humble enough to enjoy it, but also impactful enough where you can push the envelope. And I think that's what I enjoyed about it most.
Hey, Ram, I'm thinking, I've been taking furious notes here, and there's so many things ideas I'd love to dig into, but we'll get to those later. I love the idea of thriving in ambiguity. Then you, since you're out in Nike territory, you just did it, you could make a difference. Is a variant of just do it. But and these are all things that feel sort of like core to being an entrepreneur. But I want to take a step back, because when you were describing the things that kind of fed you, and Will's touched on this before, it was being in front, being on stage. And those are environments for a lot of people that scare the crap out of them. You seem to gravitate to that and thrive in it. And what I'm really curious about is, we all have different things that feed us, things that give us that yes feeling. What about that sort of feeds Ram?
Yeah, I think it's, what I think, Andy, the easiest way to think about it is, Indian classical vocal music is not the coolest thing on the planet, right? And so when I sang that music, when I was on stage, I realized that people like, what am I coming to? And why am I here? And they walk away with, oh my God, that's pretty beautiful and melodic and all the different, and there's a lot of ancient history behind it. But that transformation that happened within a 45-minute set from being, what am I here to do, to what I walk away like pretty impressed, fed me. The fact that if I just did my job and stopped caring about every single other, all the external factors, just me and the audience, that was so fun. And whether that same thing in acapella isn't always known to be the coolest thing in the world, right? And some people attend acapella concerts, but when you go and hear a song that you've loved for so long, broken up in a different way, and you get the crowd behind it, and it's not just the narcissistic feeling of people applauding for you. It's more the fact that people walked away with something that they were excited about, that they go back home and talk about. And I never knew that would be the impact. Like that wasn't the purpose of doing it. The purpose of doing it was basically, what fed me was I was really enjoying helping people see a different way of enjoying music, a different way of understanding that there's other types of music out there that they can be happy with. Hearing a song in a way that they loved, but hearing it differently, and then seeing that there's more flavors to that one song than what they imagined. I think that's what it was. And the other piece of it, Andy, to your point, was that first few butterflies, those are addictive. And getting past the butterflies, that's like an addiction. And that's kind of fun. And you walk in, you're super scared. You look outside, you see 400 people. Some people 80% you don't. And you're like, all right, let's go give it a rip. And that was so fun. Getting from the butterfly stage to the end of the concert where you felt like you did a great job was so fun. And lastly, I'll say this. I realized every single concert I gave, I had better standards for the next one that I wanted to hit. Nobody knew those. That was me and my brother, oftentimes. We were like, we really missed that note there. No one said that to us. No one would know. Only the two of us would know. And that felt like a little bit of an insider kind of, addiction too, where my brother and I were like, let's one up on the next one. Let's not miss that note on the next one. And that became, the accountability between my brother and I was so fun in that sense, because as you two might know, brothers aren't necessarily kind to each other about making mistakes. And so it became a little bit of a fun opportunity for us, and it challenged us to be pretty good at what we did.
You've talked a bit now. I didn't know about your brother actually, but you've talked a bit, I think, already about your background, kind of. I know I've poked around across your social media. You had a very traditional Indian wedding, at least one piece of it. You now have a kid. How do you think about like taking all those things that impacted you so deeply at such an early stage and, maybe cherry picking some of them or all of them and now paying them forward to your family and your child?
Yeah. So, it's funny. I've been watching this video, I don't know where, on Instagram or somewhere else, where they talk about the first generation working their butt off, second generation, working their butt off, and then they make it easier for the next generation after that, and how that's a huge mistake. And that's been actually resonating with me, because my dad keeps saying, "Oh, you're to his grandson. He's like, you're fully taken care of for life," and I'm like, that's not what he needs to hear, So, and so I think there's a little bit of like, we did this, and I think there's a continuation. Obviously, there's, again, you have to adapt to the environment that they're in and the years that they grow up, and what stage of life they're in as well. But to me, I don't think I want to push them from being creative, stop being creative, or stop taking risks. I think it's like, well, with 2 generations of risk taking in the United States, why not take more calculated risks? So I think my job is to help them figure out how to make decisions. And that's it. I think that's how simple I want to keep it. It's like, how do you make that decision? And what information do you have? And because you have a couple older people around you, maybe they can help you learn from the mistakes they made. So you're making a more educated decision than you were 2 generations ago or a generation ago. And I think that like there's some things that I'm still completely scared of, like crypto. And I don't think my child is going to be as scared of crypto or Web3, you know? So sure, they're going to be thrown into those things, but how are they making the decision that's a good place to work or a good place to be? How are they thinking about climate change, differently than I was? I thought about it as just recycling, using blue and green, and as two colors and a triangle and they're going to think about it as a real need, right? So how do I help them think about tackling some of those bigger problems and being fearless in doing so? I think that's how simple I want to keep it, because everything else is, I think, waterfalls from that to me.
Ram, I think about so many of the things you've talked about and the way you are and how that's translated into what you do. And so much of this is stuff you can't teach. It's like you can't teach a sense of humor. You can't teach somebody to be empathetic or a risk taker. And what I'd love for you to talk for a minute about, now that you're in a position where you're senior, you assess talent, you make hiring and firing decisions. And a lot of those decisions are, I think the easiest part of that is assessing somebody's skills. The hardest part is the soft stuff, the grit, the relentlessness, the risk-taking, et cetera. How do you take who you are, all those, the things you've been talking about, and translate that into how you assess talent?
Yeah. And I think this is a good question, Andy, that I need to probably write down because I've done a poor job of codifying this in my life, but I'll start here. My favorite story that my old boss taught me at Blend was to ask the question of what's your story? And what you asked, Will, is at the beginning. I think I don't time box it as much, but I literally give them time. And you can tell in that first 3 minutes, can they give you a story and where are they starting and how are those steps in their life? What were the triggers to get there? I think what's really important, Andy, for me is mostly just listening. And I think interviewers, when you're assessing talent, have a tendency to look at your scorecard and you want to ask all these questions. I think at this point I've realized, yeah, sure, so those are guideposts, but the point is to listen. And it's not like both of you have been doing. You both have picked up things differently and together, and that's what makes it unique. Is your experience tells you those are the things to pick up on. I think that's what I have to be always mindful of. My experiences is not to be forgotten, and I should leverage that experience to say, what am I listening for? So it's not really what I'm asking; it's what I'm listening for. And specifically, things I listen for are tone, inflection. I listen for specifically how they transition from one part to another. If they can explain what was a trigger to get there. Those triggers, to your point, your point to be really direct, are specifically for me, like, did they go through some pain? And then the next story, did they have less pain to make that next decision? Did they get better every time? And if they can prove to me that they learned along their journey and they care about continuing to learn along their journey, because none of us are perfect, regardless of where there's always something to learn, then I'm saying, you know what, this is someone who is coachable, right? But also is coachable in a way that they are self-aware and being able to know what they need to get ahead of. And those two things to me, and I've said this before to both of you on curiosity and discipline, is can they be curious enough to figure out on their own without someone talking to them about it because they care so deeply about learning and getting better? And are they disciplined enough to do something with it? And that's what I listen for. Like, what did you do about it now that you knew that was a problem? And I think something actually really nice at Kojo is we're actually really focused on problem solution documents as a way of communicating issues. And that's been so helpful to me because it's a framework that I love. I just never actually used it. And what I realized here is that if people speak in that language, like, I saw something, I found it, I was curious enough to dig through it. And then here's what I did about it. It teaches me that this person, it doesn't matter what the problem is. They just have an ability to go solve it and then put some work to it. And they're not trying to optimize for perfect. They're optimized for doing. And where we're at, that is so important.
I could hear us getting to that video. For our listeners, if they haven't seen it, I highly recommend. We recorded Ram on a quick kind of nugget of wisdom talking about curiosity and discipline. This concept of learning, being curious, trying to figure out quite how to ask this question. But it sounds like a lot of it, where you started the answer to this question was a boss. EdBlend who suggested, like, here's a way that you can start an interview process. What is your story? This was somebody who had an impact on you. You've talked about being the person that likes to get up in front of people and have an impact on them. You're 39 now.
Yeah.
You've accumulated a lot of learnings, wisdom. What does it take for somebody to get up in front of you at this point and actually force you to walk away with a changed perspective or be impacted in a way that you haven't before? Because I'm guessing some of these learnings and wisdom are like, some of them are not going to move, right? Like, these are the anchors of who you are. Maybe even you could explain or tell us a story about a recent one where it really kind of impacted you or changed your perspective.
Yeah, and I think the reality is, for me, Wills, it's not much. Like, I don't think I don't think I look at somebody and say, and I'm not saying you said this. It's like basically that you should impress me with some mindset. I think actually learning comes from being open-minded everywhere you go. And let me give you a real example right now. So I'm in construction tech. What do I know about construction? Not much. You just heard my background, right? And the only thing I'm coming close to is a dad who did electrical engineering, but that I don't have that much experience in this. I've probably filed 4 building permits in my entire life on a residential house, right? So what do I know? So I think this is being applied right now. I have sales reps of mine who've been in construction for 10 years. That's who I'm picking stuff up from. People who are masters of their domain. And to answer your question more directly, Wills, I look for people who have a master of something that I'm curious about. And I don't even know that I'm curious about it. They're better at that than me. A good example is this is the first time in my life I worked for a female CEO. And I'm learning a lot about how great that is to work with somebody who's generally more cerebral in nature, but also super passionate, super action oriented. That's been great. And that's a learning for me that I'm really enjoying. But that starts with me just being open at the outset. Like, it doesn't really matter where they come from or who they are, in the fact that they're CEO or not. It's this person has wisdom to share, and let me be open to it. And the same thing I'll share for the two of you. Both of you and I have had several conversations around random topics, whether it be companies that you're looking at or otherwise, or just every single one of these conversations, even the way you're asking me questions about how to clarify things, and I'm learning already I could be much more concise in my answers. That's just coming across. It's very easy for me to pick that stuff up just because I'm willing to learn it. But I think that's who I am, Wills, right? I think, and Andy, I think it's just at the end of the day, no one's on a pedestal, no one's above or below me in any way, shape, or form, whether it be a CEO, CIO I'm selling to, or a sales rep that works for me. It's every single person has something to offer. It's are we willing to accept and be open to that? And every day.
Well, I'm not sure I want you to be more concise because I've got so many nuggets I've taken down here. I was just thinking back to what you said about you and your brother, what you would do after the concert, where, the audience is cheering, they walk out, you guys look at each other and go, we missed that note.
Mm-hmm.
We're going to do that better next time. This idea of constant improvement. I'm curious how that translates again to when you are assessing talent.
Mm-hmm.
And, one of the challenges Wills and I always wrestle with is, we're dealing with people who we know are going to say stuff they think they want us to hear. And our job is, how do we get beyond that to actually understand what the truth is, or as close as we can get? So when you're sitting looking at talent, interviewing, and one of the things you're really after is this idea of, is this person going to be relentless about getting better, learning? How do you do that?
Yeah. So I learned the style called top grading interview style a long time ago at SocialTables. Actually, I think it was like 9 years ago. And the style basically asks you to pick up an exact example and just go deep on that one example. And it was typically used for execs, right? To show that, because there's stories span 100 years, you can go ahead and sit there and try to go after surface level of each of them. But what's the really most concrete thing? I think, Andy, that's the answer. I try to go deep on one thing. In 30 minutes, doing surface level on 3 things, pretty meaningless. You'll get surface level feeling walking away. But if you have something in mind that you have, there's a depth you can get to, someone being able to explain the depth end to end and all the people involved, how they either orchestrated it or were contributing to that solution, the depth meaning specifically, what did they do? How did that impact them? What was the benefit and drawback of doing that? And how did they handle the drawbacks? Why was the drawback worth the risk of the benefits? And going deep on like, okay, you rolled it out. What was the change management like to do that? Did it land or not land? Oh, it didn't land. What did you do about it? That level of depth is obviously so annoying to a candidate, but what it does to both the candidate and the interviewer is basically talks about one thing holistically, because at work, yeah, you can get 15 different things thrown at you, but you need to do one thing or 2 things in a week, or 1 thing or 2 things in a day. It's do they have the energy to drive it end to end? Number 1, do they have the thought process to figure out what are all the permutations I need to think about as they do things end to end and the implications to others? That's really important. And the third thing is, do they get pride out of the idea creation or the idea execution? And that is kind of what sits in my head all the time, is what are you proud of? Coming up with the idea or doing it? And that's what, we're, again, back to our current CEO, she said to me one thing that's really stuck with me is like, I get my number 1 thing is I love people who do what they say they're going to do. And that's all I need to know. Like that's all I need to know in terms of managing up. And
we call that the do to say ratio.
Exactly.
You want it 1 to 1.
Exactly. And that's people have fancy terms for it, like signal to noise, all these different things. You can come up with all the different words around it. But that's the difference between executing and not. And that's what I'm listening for oftentimes is what do you get excited about?
Ram, we're shifting a bit more into kind of who you are as a professional or what you've been doing. Just to kind of level set, you've had a number of roles in and around kind of sales, revenue, go to market. What would you say is your real, like, if you could pick one title or skill, like what are you especially good at? Because I know you wear a lot of hats in the organizations that you go into. What are you especially good at?
Yeah, I think at the end of the day, I'm probably one to run my own company. And it doesn't have to be a software company. It could be a small conglomerate of small businesses. It's something I want to do. And I think that's where my skill set probably, and I think you can call it whatever title you want to at the end of the day. I just like to lead teams beyond in certain problems. In certain problem areas and tackle those things and help motivate them. I think the thing that gets me excited is to help people see yes if. And that was I think that stuck with, that's actually why I joined SocialTables. Was like, I saw they had these 4 pillars, these cheesy pillars that we'll call cheesy today. But in 2012, it wasn't so obvious yes if. And that was one of the things I saw on the board when I walked in this tiny accelerator, where there was like 4 of us in this room. I saw yes if, and I was like, you know what? I can get behind that. And I think that's what I get excited about, is leading people to see the yes if these things are there. So whether that be running revenue teams or being COO or CEO or whatever it is that the goals are in life, if it's an engineering problem, it's a product problem, it's a customer problem, those are every day. But I think the reason why you're in the conversation, whether it be internally or externally, is because someone wants you to help them get past the problem that's being surfaced, or there would be no dialogue.
Yeah.
Or you just leave it astray. And I think that's what I get excited about, is doing that at scale and doing that where everybody across who works for me sees that where they can affect that change, and then they get to a place that they weren't at before. And that together, compounded across 50 different people or 10 different departments or 5 different leaders, is really exciting. When you see all that move in motion. And if you're going back to music, that's what's beautiful about music, is you go back, I worked for the Kennedy Center for a year, and attending a concert where you have an orchestra conductor and all these people are able to put together this masterpiece, but everyone has their spot because no one's doing it on their own, is literally what's exciting. And I think that's what I get pumped about, is orchestrating success.
I just want to challenge you on one thing here, because part of your answer was I want to run my own company somewhere in this. And maybe I'm misinterpreting what you mean by run. But if you spend any time on your LinkedIn, you'll see a founder title years ago at SocialTables and no founder title on anything else since. Can you explain how those two things, like you want to run your own company, you were a founder, but have not yet been since. Am I misinterpreting what you mean by run a company, or is there something else going on here?
No, not at all. I just don't think I'm ready yet. And I think that's a reality. I mean, I think I've prioritized learning other skills and understanding what I really want to run a company around. If you look at my background, I've been in hospitality, fintech, cloud technology, and now construction tech. I'm trying to figure out where I want to be passionate. And it may not always be tech, is what I'm realizing more and more. But I think generally I don't know what that is yet, but I'm not fearful so much of taking the leap. I just want to be all in when I do it, and I'm not there yet.
So is the all in attached to the particular category?
Yeah.
Versus, listen, I'm a CEO. Put me, doesn't matter the category. I thrive on doing the CEO stuff. Do you need that connection to the content?
I do need connection. Yeah, I'm very, again, going back to, for me, right now, the built environment is something that I'm totally passionate about. We don't have enough hospitals. We don't have enough, concert venues for kids to be able to perform music in not the top 25 cities. Yeah, there's a bunch of things that we can do better for the country. So that's why I'm really passionate about helping this space. But the reality is, like, I don't know what that area I want to impact is on my own yet. And it's not that I don't think I'm wandering as much as I'm trying to learn what those areas are by digging into areas that I'm genuinely interested in. And I think that's where I'm at. Is I think it definitely impact. I have to feel it. It's not about money to me. It's not about an exit to me. It's literally, am I changing the way this person's life was before my company entered?
Outside of finding the thing that you maybe are most passionate about, or all of a sudden you start waking up in the middle of the night obsessing on, as you look back on the founding role that you had at SocialTables, were there things that were super clear to you once you left that you said, I'm not going to go be a founder again. I realized I got to build a bunch of muscles in areas that I didn't realize I needed. One question on SocialTables, and if I could just add another, is there anything from SocialTables that you can share now that you couldn't share then about like a dark hour? So,
oh, absolutely. I mean, many dark hours. But
you left SocialTables. Oh my gosh, do I need to build muscles in an area? And then maybe we'd love to hear a bit more about that.
I think that's actually when we connected first time, and after is when I was in SocialTables, we were raising money, and then afterwards when I left, it was when we started. I spent a lot more time with the two of you. I think fundamentally SocialTables was hard. I was a first time VP of sales, a sales leader, first time real manager. I had 60 people at one point. That was the largest team, that I had. And I think I think with that came that those scars came an opportunity for me to reflect and say to myself, what is it that I really want to do? And we only took the thing, and I know this is only is relative. We only took the thing to 20 million in run rate about, right? And what I wanted to see is what does 100 million look like in run rate? And then what does 1 billion look like in run rate? And that's what I wanted to know. I wanted to know what those things are. Back to my concept for the kids is how can I learn as much about what can go wrong so I have a map in my head, so when I do it, I'm not doing it with the same level of trial and failure. I have a little bit more of an educated guess about how to do things. And that's why I chose Blend, is because Blend was on a track to $100 million. When I went to GCP, we went to $5 billion in run rate that year. We onboarded, I think, 7,500 reps and go to market that year. it was a very different level of scale. So I started learning those things. And why I came back to where I am today is because I wanted to put all that together and say, how do I actually lead things in a different market environment, different industry? And to answer your question directly on SocialTables, the darkest hours were always around the following things, which is the team working together, or are they blaming each other? And because the problems really weren't the problems, not hitting your forecast or that happens every week, every month in startup life, or not delivering a product or failing a customer who churns on you. All that stuff is or missing, having a bunch of buggy stuff. Those are things. The darkest hours were always based on the leadership team starting to just decompose. And I saw that happen several times at SocialTables. And that can only happen so many times before the team starts to, remember that. And it's hard to come back from that. You saw that with the Warriors recently, with Draymond punched Jordan Poole in the face. They're coming back from it. I mean, we don't know if we'll see how the season plays out. But I think that is exactly where I think I've seen teams go, that everything get hard. And it's usually, this triggered by a board meeting sometimes. It's triggered by a customer event. It's triggered by anything. But I think that's where I've noticed. And that was actually what left with me. I took 4 months off because I was like, what team do I really want to be a part of? And is this team going to get through the darkness? And it's definitely something that stuck with me.
Yeah, this might be a nice springboard. Taking a step back, you're standing in front of a room of folks who are aspiring entrepreneurs. And you're a guy who's been there, done that. You've built muscles across all sorts of different size organizations. You were just talking about, where some of the dark times come from. And you're there and you're about to give them 60 seconds of Ram wisdom about starting a business and building a business. What are the 2 or 3 most important things you want them to leave the room with, impact that you can have?
I think number one is probably the hardest thing, is give each other the benefit of the doubt as a team. And that in good times and bad times. I think that would be the number one piece of advice I give. And that same advice I'd give them is how they talk to customers. Give their customers the benefit of the doubt as they think through things. And what I mean by that specifically is, as you go through, the customer's not doing what they said they're going to do, or whatever these things are, say, hey, understand why they're not doing it. And that's what I mean. If you have that mindset, like if you open your heart up, you'll start realizing, wait a minute, there's more to it than just than what I'm seeing on the surface level. And that actually springboards into curiosity, right? Am I curious enough? Secondarily, I would say, think about everything through the lens of the person you're impacting. So I'm not saying you're always selling software, right? But if in the sense of software, what is the customer's workflow that you're changing, and how is it actually changing their life? And are they better off for it? And if anybody has that, doesn't matter if you're a CEO, COO, CFO, CMO, or CRO, or anybody who works in those functions, or even a VP of people, that's the mindset I would say. Like, figure out who your audience is, your customer is, and what is it, how are they receiving what you're going to say? And the third thing I'd say is, ideas are great. Execution is the only path to success. So sitting in a room writing a beautiful deck or a beautiful 10-page memo or a manifesto, all wonderful stuff. But what did you do about it? And those 3 things that would be the most important things I leave with anybody at all times, is using that mindset will go a long way.
Your answer kind of highlights to me what feels often unusual about your sales approach in general. Like, it's not in your face. It's not, and maybe it's different once you're inside the company, because I've never had the fortune of working for you, but your sales approach often feels a bit different than what I'm used to. And I see you head nodding. Any Like how have you developed it? How have you honed it? Or like, who did you learn key pieces of it from?
Yeah, I think that, so this started at Fisher. Fisher was probably the most ruthless sales environment will ever be a part of. $400 a day, 3 hours of talk time. You set 30 appointments, 2 stick. You have a chance of hitting your number. And bottom 25% get fired every month. And your name's on a board, so you know on the 30th what the 31st is going to look like. And so that environment, we were calling people for $1 million of their money, right? These are hardworking Americans who save their entire life. We're calling them out of the blue and say, meet with us. We're going to do this better than you. I know you've been saving for 40 years. We're going to rip it away from you, and we're going to manage it ourselves. And the way I said that to you took me months and years to figure out that's exactly what I was asking of people. and imagine that feeling. Imagine that both of you have a different feeling probably in your heart and mind about like how that feels when someone calls you out of the blue and says, I'm going to do this better than you. And even though you've been, as a plumber, you built a business from ground up, or a salesperson, or a doctor, or a lawyer, right? The kinds of objections I took, the kinds of brutal feedback I took from people in the business and outside the business is probably what was formative for me to have this mindset of, why not transplant myself in their shoes and ask them questions about their life and really get to know, like, is this the right thing for them before I even sell them anything? Mm-hmm. And really understand where they're coming from, because it really is a human connection. I'm not only managing your money and taking it away from you, I'm actually trying to help you get to where you want to be without you having to do it, because there might be some help out there that is worth it. And even just the way I said that lands softer than just saying this is good for you. Mm-hmm. And that's what I realized at the end of the day is all these mediums we have, phone, Zoom, in person, webinars, everything like that. You have to think about the audience as what they're feeling at the end of the day, and what flavors that that any word you have can have on them, and how does that actually help them get to a place, because they're coming there for you, and they're coming there to learn something. They're not wasting their time. I think that was formative for me. And at SocialTables, I took that even to the next level, which was basically, we had a bunch of hospitality people that thought we were going to take their jobs away with technology, right? This is a business that every paycheck matters. Loan officers, a blend, same thing. They thought, you're taking the relationships away from me by putting this digital application in front of my doorstep. You're automating a human being? No way. Construction, I know how to build something. Why do I need to talk? What are you going to do to help me? And so that thread applies across all of these areas. If I transplant myself into the field worker's shoe, the foreman's shoe, the general contractor's shoe, the electrical, president's shoes, it's really hard. There's a bunch of things going on there, like labor shortage, supply chain. You can use any word you want, but those problems don't go away. It's how am I connecting with them in a way that says, you know what, I feel like you're someone who gets me, and you're staying in your lane about what you're good at, and you acknowledge what I'm good at, and together we can achieve something. That has been my secret sauce in selling. And by the way, I'm like a very mediocre salesperson, so there's probably people who do this better than me. But that's what they say. Mediocre salespeople become sales leaders. So
I love that because I have a bit of insider knowledge because you're an advisor in one of our companies. So I'd say, in addition to your answer, I also know that you hold your teams highly accountable. As recently as yesterday, I heard that 3 hours of talk time is a target that one of our companies has to reach. So I think, clearly there's like a balance here, but I love your answer there. It's really insightful.
A mediocre sales guy who just seems to have repetitive luck for 20 years.
Yeah, it's like, I've been around people who are much better than me. And that's the other thing I would say, Andy, is the one piece of your advice that I forgot is always be around people that are better than you. That's what I would say to every single founder or every single person who's starting anything. Find people that are better than you. Because at Blend, I saw sales reps that were career sales reps, and I just listened and I just watched how they operated. And man, they were earning, $1 to $3 million a year. That's NFL money.
Yeah.
And so they're not their paycheck is what they weren't excited about. They love their process. And that's what, and so learning from gold is better than, and then trying to be that only happens by osmosis. And I think that's what, in a lot of ways, you can read as many books and documents as you want, but just being around them is great.
Man, if only more people could even follow those two lessons, like always be around people that are better than you. And going back to earlier in the conversation, just be open. Well, yeah, I think we'd have better companies, better people, better relationships.
Yeah, Ram, you may remember that divine ratio we have, the 4-to-1, two eyes, 2 ears, 1 mouth.
Yep.
Ram, I was looking at your LinkedIn again, and you left Blend, went to Google Cloud, and then came back to Blend. I think that says a lot about how you probably left the organization. And then you had the opportunity to come back to a place after a short, but sounds like very formative experience about like what, I think you said, what good looks like when you were at Google Cloud. Can you tell us about like how people should not or never close doors behind them, even though sometimes it's good?
Yeah. If you look at my, my Twitter handle, it's actually the Bill Walsh quote around relationships. And I think, I think for anyone, The Score Takes Care of Itself by Bill Walsh is probably my favorite book I've ever read. And I'm also a diehard 49ers fan, so that also helps. But reality is relationships are the only thing we have. I think whether it be in our own families or in the bodega that you go to, or the coffee shop you go to, everything is a relationship, right? And I don't think people really realize that anymore. I think that's lost with Twitter. I think it's lost with Facebook and Instagram, is that everything and so what has happened because of that? Well, there's now multiple tiers of relationships. There's surface level ones, there's completely virtual ones, and then there's kind of mediocre kind of relationships, and then there's ones that are really like my trust tree. And that's what the beautiful thing is that happened with social media. People want to blame it on relationships, but really what it's done is actually highlighted which are the 100 people that you could actually have great relationships with. And to me, even to this day, Nima, Tim, and I text from Blend. I'll send them things that I'm reading in the news. I'm not naive to that. Kelly, my boss at Google Cloud, who's now VP there, are still texting. And it's not because we're always asking each other for something. There's always something that we get. There's something that we all connect with, which is that we once worked for each other or with each other. We had some success. Let's not lose sight of that feeling that we together were better than alone. And it doesn't necessarily mean that we're always going to be together in every single part of our life, but it could mean a good intro or a reference check that we have to, and it's always about giving something without asking something to me. And that's exactly what these relationships are now with my boss. Like I'm talking to my old boss at Blend, the first one and how I'm helping him look at new gigs. And he's talking to me about how to talk about go-to-market strategy. What did we accomplish? So, I worked for him, but I'm trying to guide him on how to help him land a new gig right now. And we're just thought partners. And I trust him a lot. And I think what I'm trying to say at the end of the day is, it's not just because you work for that person that they can't learn from you, or there's multiple types of relationships. And I think I go back to the one thing I said at the beginning, is that you have to be open. If you get a text out of the blue and you haven't talked to that person in 2 years, that's okay. Don't punish that person, right? A relationship is, again, responding to them and say, can I be helpful, right? And I think that it's an often 10 times tendency, like, why I just delete that message, or like I would do that. Like, I haven't heard from that person. That's actually the person in their biggest need of time. That's why they reached out to you in 2 years. Right, like right now, they need to be helped. So you being there for that them in that moment is, sure, it's a little selfish feeling. Humans like the feeling of helping people, but reality is, it's also what they'll remember. It's not the 2 years before that you didn't talk to them. It's that moment in time where they needed help.
Jesus, this is so chock full of wisdom. I don't even know where to begin. Although I will say, Ram, I'm smiling here because both you and Wills are from the same, cut from the same cloth in terms of paying it forward and, giving, not asking. So it makes a huge difference. I just love that line. Relationships are the only thing we have. Go ahead.
Well, you touched quickly on like relationships here. And I think earlier you talked about, now a team that's remote and, social media maybe has led us to forget about relationships. You recently moved from San Francisco up to Portland. My understanding is you are running and building your team kind of remotely, right?
Yeah.
Any kind of pieces of wisdom about how to do that successfully? Because so many of our companies are doing it. So many companies across the country are doing it. And we have the benefit of meeting you right now as you're entering a new company. How do you establish this? How do you do this successfully?
Yeah, I think the key thing is to not use one medium to reach people. So because we work from home, we think Zoom is the only way. Sometimes picking up a phone and calling somebody and going for a walk is relationship building. It's as if they're standing next to you. Not the same. Going to visit them, visiting all my managers is the first thing I did in the first 2 weeks across the country. I flew to Austin, flew to LA, I flew to different places just to make sure I saw them. So you do need to do some in-person stuff. Then there's team member stuff. Then there's things you can do on Zoom as a team. But I think the key thing, Wills, is in a remote environment, you can't actually think about single threading, which is actually great for sales to help people, teach them that you have to multi-thread. You have to go through different people. But on top of that, it's also being much more cognizant that this is not, if you just ask them work stuff, you will have that level of relationship. Remember, back to surface level, virtual relationships, real relationships in the trust tree. You have to get to know their pains, what they're going through, ask them what's going on in their life. And typically in-person meetings, we used to skip that stuff in the office. That's no longer an option. And getting to know what that person's life is like is so important. That's what used to be shared at the water cooler. Sure, they complain about work, but they really tell you about what they're excited about, what concert they're going to. And I think the last thing I'll say is micro celebrations. I'll always focus on micro celebrations. So it's not about the last task that you're completing, like launching a full go-to-market plan. It's the fact that, one rep was able to close a deal outbound without getting an inbound lead, celebrating that first outbound deal, right? And I think that is so much more important in remote environments is micro celebrations.
Awesome. We're coming up on the hour here. I know we could go way longer. I could certainly, but want to be mindful of your time. And, we like to close these with a bunch of rapid fire questions.
Sure.
We'd ask you to kind of answer with that top of mind thought, not too many words. Best decision you've ever made?
Marrying Aaron.
Worst decision you've ever made?
Assuming someone was wrong when I didn't know any information.
And you shared a bit on this. Best kind of hiring strategy advice to somebody who's trying to build a team?
Hire someone great, even if you don't need them right then.
Knowing what you know today about everything you've accumulated over time, if you could give a piece of advice to 21-year-old Ram starting out on his career, anything that you'd tell Ram that he didn't know at the time?
Yeah, hold yourself to higher standards. Don't waver on the standards.
Gotcha. If your next chapter had to be something totally different, and it could be anything, you don't have to think about family, salary, whatever, what might we find you doing?
Teaching kids in community colleges how to sell.
Love that. It's called impact.
And the Ram epitaph. Sometimes this can sound a bit morbid, but like, what would you like it to read?
I enjoyed every conversation with that person.
Andy?
There's so many things I wrote down here, so many quotes I love. Ram, this has been incredible. This has been like a, one of the, what was it in Forrest Gump where you open it up and there are all these surprises in here. And it's been eye-opening. It's nutritious, healthy, and good tasting.
I actually have one. I have one more if I could, because I've been thinking about this. I've heard Andy talk about it over the years, and man, it's just so true. But like ego can just ruin everything.
Mm-hmm.
And I think a lot of people that we meet are highly competitive, like to win, probably, deserve the right to have some ego, but the successful ones never let that ego interfere with their ability to evolve, listen, learn. And I think you're a case of that. But why do so many people succumb to ego is what I'm trying to understand. And how can you change that?
Well, I think a lot of it is also, are they rewarded for being that way? And I think so. You also think business environments need to foster humility as well. But I honestly, I don't really know how to help people think about the fact that they're not perfect, and that there's a lot to get better on. And I think if I look at the CEOs that I admire out there, right, like Satya Nadella, like Thomas Kurian, who I had the pleasure of working for, nothing was good enough because they wanted to be better every day. And that's what good looks like. Is that if I look at Steph Curry, he's not trying to be the same he was last season. And so the people we admire, oftentimes we forget what's their DNA, which is to always be better.
Yeah, I love that. Ram, really appreciate this time. Thank you so much for this, and look forward to having way more conversations and building, our relationship even deeper over time. But thank you. This has been great.
Absolutely. Thank you both. And I got to run, but I appreciate it. And we'll talk soon. Let me know where I can be helpful.
Take care.
See ya.
Thank you for listening, and I hope you enjoyed this interview. If so, please visit our website where you can find many more like it. It's important to remember that behind all the great products and companies and software that we love, at the end of the day, there are people.